Did you know there was estrogen in your gut? Find out more on this next episode of Digest This.
Welcome to Digest This, the show that helps you revolutionize your digestive health. Here are your hosts, Dr. Liz Cruz and Tina Nunziato.
Hello, and welcome to Digest This. I'm Dr. Liz Cruz, and I've got Tina Nunziato sitting right by my side. If you're watching us, thank you so much for joining us. If you are one of our regular listeners, we love you. We thank you for being on this journey with us, for always taking the time to hang out with us. If you're a new listener, we welcome you, and we're so excited that you found us, and we hope that you will stay with us on this journey. We do have over 550 episodes out there in our library, so please check it out. One of the things that Tina and I love to do is have guests on our show. And we had a guest on our show back in May, early May, and he is back. And so we are very excited. Dr. Lamoureux, welcome to our show again.
Yes,
We're so
thanks for
excited
coming
you're
back.
here.
I'm
So
excited
thank
too.
you.
Thanks for having me back.
Obviously, you had a good experience because you wanted to
Yes,
do it again.
absolutely.
We have a lot of
Yeah.
fun.
We
Try
do.
to have a lot of fun.
We do.
Anyway.
I think that the topic that Dr. Lamoureux is going to talk to us about today is awesome because I don't think it's a well-known thing. And I know there's a lot of information out there on all the social media platforms, and we're just in overload with information. And so you may or may not have heard about the connection of your gut and estrogen. It's just something that I think is fascinating because I'm going to be honest, I really didn't even know that we had estrogen in our gut. And
Gastroenterologist?
I know, right? I love that. I'm learning, continue to learn every day. And so I think it's a great topic. Dr. Lamoureux, I know you're going to focus on estrogen, the gut health, mental health, which I think is a wonderful and an awesome topic. So thank you so much for being here again, and we're just so excited. And I know that you've got, kind of like a little outline you want to follow. So go ahead and start out, and then as we go along, Tina and I can ask
Yeah,
questions.
sure. So for all of the listeners, I focus on mental health, and that's my area of expertise. And as an extension of that, I started learning more and more about all these different things that impact mental health. And so one of the first things that I needed to know well was the impact between hormones and mental health. And estrogen is a big one. I think a lot of listeners are aware of, especially the women, of how much estrogen can impact mood, especially throughout the menstrual cycle, throughout perimenopause and menopause, and then also during pregnancy and the postpartum period. We all kind of have a awareness that estrogen plays a huge role in our mental health. It affects multiple neurotransmitters. And so I think most people listening are probably familiar with serotonin and dopamine, and estrogen affects the levels of both of those in the body, and also some other neurotransmitters like GABA and glutamate, which also impact our mood and our mental health in general. And so here today, we're kind of wanting to talk about the intersection between estrogen, our mental health, and then how that interplays with the gut, because the gut is a massive contributor of how our body regulates estrogen.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
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 And I love that you brought up pregnancy. We typically, when we get on these podcasts and we're talking about hormones, we're typically talking about perimenopause, menopause, but especially for mental health reasons, I think pregnancy, postpartum is a really important time to be talking about hormones and how they affect mental health, because I know a lot of women struggle during pregnancy and post-pregnancy with mental health issues.
Absolutely. And so, for men's hormones don't fluctuate in quite the same way. And although estrogen plays a lot of these roles in men to a lesser degree, we tend to focus more on testosterone in men, as kind of like preeminent hormone affecting mental health. And then in women, again, we have like these changes, these fluctuations in estrogen, and a lot of moving parts.
Yeah, that's
The body continues to amaze me.
it does. Yeah. To add on to what what she just pointed out about pregnancy and the focus that we usually do on menopause and perimenopause, I am actually fascinated to know more about your opinion also, even after, like 10 years after we've gone into menopause, like where you still feel like you have some brain fog and you're like, okay, could there still be something hormonal going on here? And even
Yeah,
mood changes. Like the mood changes, there'll be times when, I have a mood change, or I may feel some like crampiness and we talk about, oh, there's still got to be some hormones in there that is causing that, even though, not having a period anymore. I mean, even though it's been over 10 years, there's got to still be something going on there.
absolutely.
So that's also even many, many years after the onset of menopause, I just feel like there could still be stuff brewing.
Absolutely. And of course, like with so many things in the body, there so much of it's multifactorial, so many different things to consider. But yeah, with the hormones piece, I basically had women in perimenopause, menopause coming in, experiencing depression and anxiety in ways that they weren't before. And again, like starting to say, like, okay, like, what can we do? How can we support this? And so I very much got into bioidentical hormone replacement therapy as a very effective way of supporting some of that. And so one thing that's interesting is we need to have estrogen in the right balance. And the too much or too little,
Mhm.
both can cause problems, variety of ways for
Mhm.
mental health and other things. And so estrogen going too low, like we are relatively aware that in menopause, what's happening is estrogen levels are dropping, other hormone levels as well. Um, when estrogen
Mhm.
drops, it can actually create imbalances in the gut, in our gut microbiome and our gut bacteria. And that can then again, so then we're having a decreased estrogen, um, hormone levels impact our mood, and then that's contributing to shift in the gut too. And then we've got our gut brain connection. And so there's a lot there. And I mean, I am certainly a believer that and there's a lot of different kind of ideas and opinions about it. But I think for women who are suffering, especially with like their mental health, I don't hesitate to support with hormones if it's indicated and there's no, contraindications. And again, that can be helpful for the gut. That can be helpful for the mood as well.
Mhm. So, is there actually any estrogen then that is within the gut itself, like byproducts of it or the actual hormone or anything like
Yeah,
that?
so I'll go on my whole speech about estrogen in the gut. So, and I think it's maybe easier to speak about it before menopause, like during like cycling years for women. And so, most of the estrogen is produced in the body is coming from the ovaries, and so the ovaries are making estrogen, which then circulates out into the rest of the body, and it kind of does its thing. And then when it's done, it goes to the liver, and so then the liver sort of preps the estrogen to get ready for removal from the body. And then after that happens, the liver basically dumps that estrogen that's kind of like marked for removal into the intestines. So then it goes through our gastrointestinal tract, and some of it ends up getting pooped out, basically. But a lot of it actually then gets reabsorbed along the way. It gets activated again. So before it was sort of deactivated, getting ready for removal, and bacteria in the gut actually reactivate it, and then it gets absorbed, and then
Hmm.
estrogen can have its effects again. And there's a term for like this whole dynamic. It's called the estrobolome, kind of a combination of estrogen
That's cool.
and microbiome. And
Hmm.
a lot of the bacteria produce a enzyme that's well studied called beta glucuronidase, and that reactivates this estrogen. So a small amount gets excreted, and then it gets reabsorbed, and then can go back in, and that can actually lead to excess estrogen. So when the motility, so movement along the GI tract, gets slowed down, or if there's constipation, it basically gives those bacteria more of a chance to reactivate that estrogen, send it back in, and then you can have an excess estrogen situation. Because again, the body's expecting to be able to remove a certain amount of the estrogen and then save the rest. And the reason the body is doing that ultimately is to recycle so that it doesn't have to work as hard to make more estrogen, because making estrogen does require like nutrients and raw materials, and the body's like having to work to do that. And so by just taking something that it already made and then recycling it, it's easier on the body. But yes, like during the, like that's a huge gut estrogen interaction, because if there's then too much estrogen, women can start having mental health symptoms and then a whole bunch of other excess estrogen symptoms as well.
It's actually interesting to know that our body not only has waste disposal, but it also has a
Yeah.
recycling center. So thank you.
Isn't that cool? I love it. It's the body's really economical,
Awesome.
in a lot of these ways, trying to conserve energy as much as possible for us.
I wonder why, because I've had a lot of women who are fairly healthy, they eat healthy, they exercise, they have good sleeping habits. They tend to have less symptoms as they're going through perimenopause and menopause. I feel like maybe because the body is working at high capacity and working to recycle and reuse and allow the body to continue functioning, even while it's going through those things.
And ultimately, the way I think of it is kind of a vulnerable time. There's a lot of changes happening. And whenever the more changes that are happening, the more moving parts, the more kind of vulnerable like a system can be at that time. And so if everything else is in order, like, diet, exercise, like connection, like joy, like if all of these things are, like lower levels of stress, then it's not as big of a deal for the body to kind of recalibrate and can make these changes. But if that's happening during a time when there's really significant psychological or physiological stresses, then the body struggles, and then the result can be these increased symptoms of menopause.
So how are you testing your patients when they come in for this specific thing with estrogen?
Yeah. So I guess there's kind of a multifactorial piece there, because I always am asking my patients questions about their poop. Like, how often are you going? Like, are you constipated? Because that's one of the first things I want to know. And then I definitely like to test blood estrogen levels for women who are cycling. There's kind of points in the cycle that we usually use it. So we like to do day 3 of the period. And then 7 days before the next expected period. So essentially 7 days between ovulation and the next period. Those are two kind of sweet spots to see what's happening with estrogen. I also often make use of urine hormone metabolism testing. So some people may have heard of like a Dutch test, and that essentially is measuring how the estrogen is getting broken down. And then that can tell us some additional information about like what may be happening with like the hormone picture. And then, of course, combining that with symptoms as well, and kind of trying to put this whole picture together to get an understanding of what's happening, which can be a little bit tricky just because for women who are cycling, estrogen levels are fluctuating throughout the whole cycle. And puberty and perimenopause, those fluctuations can get very wild. Like you can have like these very like high, very low levels before it levels off in menopause, where for a woman who's postmenopausal, the levels are going to be a little bit more consistent. And at that point, you don't really have to worry about like measuring on a particular day.
Yes, we have teenagers right now through all of that. So we understand this.
We're actually in all the phases.
We are.
Our household is, I think, in all phases.
Puberty, perimenopause, menopause.
Yeah, and we call menopause second puberty. There's this kind of like this mirror image of the body getting ready to start cycling in puberty, and there's like a lot of like changes and fluctuations, and then that same kind of thing happens again with menopause, kind of initiating this phase of life. And so I think that that's super cool. But yeah, like there's a little bit of turbulence before it, like before puberty, it's pretty stable. After puberty or after menopause, it's like pretty stable. But in between, like you got a bit of a roller coaster that can happen.
Yeah.
Are there any specific tests that you do for, again, pregnancy or postpartum that you would normally not do on others?
That I would normally not do on others. There's a lot of overlap. In pregnancy, estrogen and progesterone levels skyrocket, like to maintain the pregnancy. And typically I'm handing that off to an obstetrician to monitor. In the postpartum period, I'm very interested in nutrient stores and then hormone levels, because there's quite a bit of a demand on the body to grow a human inside of you and that give birth to that human. And there's a lot of nourishment that needs to happen to help the body through that whole process, which can be tricky because, a lot of us don't have the nutrient levels that we really need for optimal health.
Yeah, I was just talking about that with somebody, and the people that are on these kind of standard one-a-day multis instead of eating a nutritious diet. And even the people on the GLP-1s now, and a lot of the stuff that's happening with their lack of nutrition, because either they're not eating enough, or just the way the body is processing the food on the GLP-1, they're not getting the nutrients. So that too, just lack of nutrition.
Yeah. And GLP-1s, they help you lose weight. They reduce your appetite. And, yeah, like when you don't have an appetite, it's going to be hard to eat the food that you need. And also ultimately we probably need both in many cases, like eating a good diet with like a nutrient dense diet. And there still can be some gaps and that we can fill in with like multivitamins or targeted nutrients. And, we're talking about pregnancy. I mean, certain nutrients are kind of more critical for the development of the fetus and the baby throughout the pregnancy. And it can be very hard to get enough of that in the diet. It can be hard to get enough omega-3, enough calcium, enough folate is probably the most well known. But then, yeah, like these other ones as well that the baby is utilizing and the mother needs it as well. But then after as well to bounce back and recover.
So I have a couple questions. One is going to be as far as estrogen production, years after menopause, in menopause. And then the other question is as far as your use of treatment. You mentioned
Mhm.
bioidentical hormones. I want to talk about your
Yeah.
treatment, but I'm 60 years old. It's been well over 10 years, I think, that I became menopausal. So, you know, and I still have ovaries. So are those ovaries squeezing out a little bit of estrogen, or
I love
what
to talk about
happens
this.
at this? Right.
So before menopause, the primary producer of sex hormones in the body is the ovaries. After menopause, it's not coming from the ovaries, it's actually coming from your adrenal glands. So the sex hormones that are circulating in a woman's body post menopause are being produced by the adrenal glands. And so for anyone who hasn't heard of the adrenal glands, they're these little tiny glands that sit on top of your kidneys, and they're responsible for producing cortisol. And so cortisol is kind of a stress hormone. It helps us wake up in the morning, but then we also produce it in response to both physical and mental stressors. And so this kind of situation develops after menopause where the adrenal glands are now responsible for the sex hormones for the whole body and also
Hmm.
coping with stressors. And so it's the adrenals are working like double time essentially at that point. And so
Wow.
more care is really needed in that sense for what the brain adrenal axis, or what we call the HPA axis, uh, to support both
Mm-hmm.
stress and sex hormone production, because that's where those little bits of estrogen are coming, and testosterone and DHEA and some other hormones as well.
Interesting. And you know how there's levels, heights as far as in the ovaries, as far as what hormones during the cycle. But now that there's no cycle, so to speak, the adrenal glands, are they just kind of producing estrogen like the little constant baseline of estrogen all the time? Or is there also some sort of cycle?
As far as I know, it's fairly consistent. And essentially what's happening is the adrenals are producing small amounts of precursors that can then get converted into estrogen or testosterone. So precursors like DHEA and pregnenolone the body can then use those materials to make like small amounts of estrogen, of testosterone, because it's not like totally zero, but significantly lower levels of sex hormones than previously.
Okay, that's so cool. Thank you so much for sharing that. So let's move over then
Mhm.
into treatment then. So you're measuring these hormones, but your focus is
Yes.
mental health. And I know that you have patients, everyone has a different story and different
Yeah.
lab values and everything. But in general, what is your treatment? I mean, is it a combination of hormones and antidepressant, or do you just focus mainly with hormones, or
Yeah, I
how do
work
you
a
do
lot
that?
with patients with their hormones to support their mental health. And again, not against antidepressants, but I'm typically trying to support people with nutrition, diet, and lifestyle, like a lot of herbal medicine as well, and hormones.
Okay.
So yes, I do a lot of hormone prescribing, specifically like hormone replacement or support for people who are needing it. And so with women, it kind of depends, right? If like cycling, like pre-puberty, cycling, pregnancy, perimenopause, menopause, going to be approaching a little bit differently, but a lot of it, the principles are the same. So it's ultimately kind of trying to get an idea of, could estrogen be in excess? And if it is, a lot of times that's because of something going on with the gut. So for someone with IBS, with constipation, for example, we're expecting to see more of a disruption with the estrogen and possibly excess estrogen. And when I say that, I often mean relative to progesterone. So progesterone, estrogen and progesterone, we want in a certain balance with each other. So if there is excess estrogen and not enough progesterone, then the first things we're kind of like, hey, like, how can we support your digestion, your gut health? How can we get the nutrients you need in your body to produce progesterone, for example, to produce estrogen? Because sometimes I see patients who are malnourished and they're not able to produce enough of estrogen and progesterone to begin with. And so then we're kind of working on calories and nutrients to build that up. And so I think with hormones, one of the answers to your question is like kind of getting an idea of where the hormones at and then what needs to happen next to help balance those hormones. And a lot of times I'm actually not necessarily starting with sex hormones. I'm starting with cortisol and adrenal hormones, and I'm starting with insulin resistance and like thyroid, because I find that by working on those first, it becomes much easier then to balance the sex hormones. It can be quite an uphill battle trying to work on that if there's significant problem with the thyroid or insulin resistance or that brain adrenal axis.
That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and actually, I'm just curious, the bioidentical, what's your preferred method? Is it creams? Is it pellets? Or what do
Yeah, I
you
use
prefer?
for estrogen, I strongly prefer topical approaches. It's much gentler on the body than the oral forms of estrogen are. And so using a lot of creams, but also patches or gel will work for estrogen. And pellets are great. And so for anyone listening, like essentially the way pellets work is your doctor makes a little incision and tucks some pellets into that incision and then closes it up, and those pellets dissolve over a period of several months. And so you don't have to worry about like dosing yourself every day. And that can be super nice. I typically don't start anyone with that because I want to make sure that they're responding well to hormone replacement. Because if you put the pellets in and you're kind of stuck, you can't really get them out if you're not responding well. So you can get stuck for like 3 months of not feeling well. But if you know that you respond well to hormones, that's an amazing option. So estrogen, yes, want it to be not oral. And we could talk about why with like something called first pass metabolism. But progesterone is much safer to take orally. So that's actually my preferred method for progesterone. It can be topical or oral. A lot of women, since we're kind of speaking more about women today, do very well with replacing testosterone or DHEA if needed. And again, measuring levels, I'm looking at symptoms, and then, preference is a huge, huge piece. And I like to start with, again, diet and lifestyle and nutrition, because often that's enough to do the trick and to get people feeling better. But if it's not, hormones work very well.
So, actually, let's talk a little bit about diet and lifestyle. I mean, can you just give us a few things that you would recommend as far as, diet and exercise? I mean, yams, I
Yeah.
mean, you hear about, is it
Yep.
yams or sweet
You got
potatoes?
it.
Is it the
You got
yams?
it. Yes.
Like, what?
Then there is some progesterone effect that you can get from wild yam. It's pretty mild compared to using bioidentical progesterone. And so sometimes that can be a good fit. Some herbs out there like Vitex, for example, for progesterone is a popular one. With estrogen, there's a lot of different options that are out there. Things like black cohosh, or people talk a lot about soy, for example, and using soy to support
Yeah.
hormone levels. I'm generally trying to get people to eat more whole foods, more vegetables. We all are kind of aware of that. And then with estrogen, so low levels of fiber, like I was talking about, for someone who's cycling, low fiber can lead to excess estrogen levels. So in that situation, often trying to increase fiber to balance out estrogen. I'm often like measuring, again, nutrient levels, and then trying to guide people to incorporate some more foods for specific nutrients. But yeah, there's not necessarily a one size fits all. But again, the closer a food is to like nature, it's generally going to be better. The more processed it is, generally, the worse it's going to be for you.
When you do put someone on hormones, or you get them to eat better or whatever it is, and their hormones get regulated, their mood gets regulated, they start feeling better that way. Do you also notice that they start, like if they're super constipated, they come in with you super constipated, do you also notice the bowels also are now getting more relieved more
Yeah,
regularly?
it's kind of a funny thing. I have like a running list of like a lot of different symptoms and things that are bothering each person I work with. And I try to go over and check in on all those, because a lot of times there'll be like these random things that got better that they're like, oh yeah, now that I think about it, that hasn't been bothering me for a few months. But yes, with sleep and bowel movements, for example, are so critical. I'm always asking about both of those, and always checking in on diet. I'm always Yeah, like again, the movement piece. You asked about that earlier. I mean, most of the time with that, I'm trying to get people to do things that are fun, moving their body. I'm like, all right, try to pick something that you enjoy, that's fun for you, that you like actually look forward to doing, rather than feeling like you have to like set a timer and be like, okay, moderate intensity, I'm on the treadmill and I don't really like doing this, but I guess I will if I have to. It's so much more fun to be like, oh, I'm going to go play pickleball with my friends or something like that, and again, move your body in that way.
Awesome.
Yeah, I love what you're doing and your lifestyle counseling and guiding them along that. I think that's so great because you mentioned that sometimes just with, lifestyle, diet, and movement, like that in itself could make such a
Yeah.
difference. And so that's
Eh,
wonderful.
And because you're working primarily with mental health, I mean, most people go see their naturopathic doctor maybe once a month,
uh,
once a quarter, to kind of get things checked in. But because you're doing more mental health, are you also doing therapy with people where you're meeting with them once a week or more regularly, or how does that
Yeah,
part
so
work?
I do therapy in my practice. What I normally try to do is to actually have people doing both things and have kind of like a team put together. And so although like I could be doing therapy and some of this work with like the same person, often I'm kind of trying to focus on one or the other. So if I'm focusing on their medical care, trying to connect them with the therapist that's a good fit for their needs, or if I'm working on, with someone on therapy, kind of getting them connected with any of the medical providers who are going to make sense for what they need the most support with. Because again, I'm a big fan of people having a team, multiple perspectives, multiple people they can turn to for guidance. But yes, I can do both. And a lot of visits often do go into that territory because even though I'm focusing on a medical approach, like I do want to know about the stresses and the traumas that are affecting people is relevant. We were talking about like pregnancy and the postpartum period. I mean, I want to know, like, do you have friends or family that are helping support you, that are coming over and maybe giving you a chance to sleep, because those things have such a massive impact. And so often going into that with patients and them sometimes doing therapy, talking a lot about how do we get you doing these activities like movement or eating well. Sometimes people will tell me that they feel like they don't deserve to eat well and nourish their bodies. They feel so negatively towards themselves. And so trying to like work on that. And so there's some crossover for sure in those different roles. But yeah, again, generally what I'm doing in my practice is kind of trying to approach the mental health from a more medical, biochemical angle, and then connecting people again to sort of a support system of other providers.
Very
It's
cool.
wonderful. Okay, and you're practicing
You
out of
got it.
San
Yes.
Diego. Uh,
I
you
do
do
virtual, and so
virtual?
I have patients all over California. Yeah.
Okay, okay, alrighty. All right, so you take patients that are in California, right? That's where
Yep,
you're licensed?
primarily, and then I believe it is on my website, but there is another practice that I'm associated with, and I do work with some select people outside of California. It just depends on
Okay.
the state. We're all trying to navigate all of these aspects of since COVID of the virtual world and all the laws and regulations for that.
Absolutely. All right. No, this has been great. Thank you so much for being on the show with us and for all this great
Yeah.
information.
Oh,
I've learned
good.
a
I
lot.
love it. I love it. I hope the listeners did too.
All right. Well, if you want to connect with us, you can find us on our website, drlizcruz.com. There's a magenta color button that you can click and schedule a free 30-minute wellness consult. You can also subscribe to the podcast so that you never miss an episode. And if you haven't rated us, please rate us. Please give us a 5. It'll help other people just like you to find us and be able to listen in on these amazing shows that we have, these interviews with other providers. And also, while you're on our website, subscribe to our newsletter. We put that out every couple weeks. All right. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will catch you on the next podcast.
Thank you for joining Dr. Liz Cruz and Tina Nunziato. To learn more about their revolutionary products and services, go online to www.drlizcruz.com.